starting standard form, which looks different than those other two. So standard form looks like this.
How was your weekend and day?
That was pretty good. I'll tell you all about it later if you would like to know. Okay, so AX plus BY equals C. Pencil. Thank you, Carrie Anna. Standard form looks like this, okay? AX plus BY equals C. What happens with standard form is you end up with an x-intercept and a y-intercept, which can be great as long as you are able to keep straight what is what. So I'm going to give you a graph here of an example of how standard form works. Let's say you have a point here at 0, 2, and then a point at -4, 0. So that your line looks like this. Okay, so you have this line. They're going to ask the question. Well, let's do this. I'll move this over a little. Here's how they'll ask it, okay? First example. They'll say, what are the x and y intercepts? 5.5a, standard form. Of the graph of 3x plus 4y equals 24. Okay. So what happens is you'll get so this graph does not go with this question right now, but I want you to see that there's a relationship between them. You're going to start with finding x and y intercepts. And you found y intercepts before when it's in slope-intercept form, but you won't have slope-intercept form on these to be able to find them. So what I want you to see here is in this setup, in the graph that I gave you, your x-intercept and your y-intercept are these 2 points. This one is your x or your y-intercept? Y, right? It's where it hits your y-axis. This is your y-intercept. Okay? This one is where it hits your x-axis. So that is called your x-intercept. So you will have both of those when working with standard form. Okay? So this equation is standard form right now. Here's how it works. Think about what an x-intercept and a y-intercept are. If it's hitting the y-axis, that point is 0, 2. If it's hitting the x-axis, that point is -4, 0. What do those 2 points have in common?
0.
A 0, okay? That 0 is what's going to help you a ton in this setup, okay, in this type of problem. Basically what we're saying is that if I want to know what the x-intercept is, okay, so like on this, my x-intercept, my y value is 0. So I should be able to plug in a 0 for y and figure out what my x-intercept will be. So if I did 3x plus 4 times 0 equals 24, I'm going to get my x-intercept if I solve for x. Does that make sense? Okay, my y value is 0. That means I have to get an x-intercept when I solve it. So if we solve this, I get 3x plus 0 equals 24, and 3x plus 0 is 3x. So if 3x equals 24, then when I divide by 3, I get x equals 8. That means my x-intercept is at 8. So if I were looking at a graph, let me just show you on a graph here. If my x-intercept is 8, that means on my x-axis, I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. This point right here is my x equals 8. It's where it hits my x-axis, okay? If I want to solve for my y-axis, look back up here. For my y-axis, my x value was 0. So if I plug in a 0 for x, I will get my y. So if we do that, 3 times 0 plus 4 times y equals 24. 3 times 0 is 0, so I get 4y equals 24. Divide by 4, and I get y equals 6. That's my y-intercept. That's where it hits the y-axis. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 right here. That means the graph of this would be this line when I connect my x-intercept and my y-intercept. Okay? Yeah.
So you know the underline, let's say the numbers that you underline. So did you plug the numbers into?
Like this underlined and this underlined?
Yeah.
You plug, so I did the same equation, right? Here's my equation. I plugged in a 0 for y to solve for x. And then I did a different one, same equation. I plugged in a 0 for x to solve for y. Okay?
And then I didn't know you said. Did you? Go on. I was just saying.
Well, that's like we're done with the problem at this point.
Because I'm confused how you said that the 3x plus 4 equals 0.
For time, how I set this up?
Yeah.
Right, so if you, okay, look at your equation up here. See this equation? If I want to know what my x-intercept is, my y value here has to be 0, and that will give me an x-intercept. So if I plug in a 0 right here, whatever I get for x is where it hits the x-axis. But then I do it a second time, and I plug the 0 in for x, and that's going to give me where it hits the y-axis when I solve for y, okay? So this is what you're doing, but there's kind of this shortcut. I'll show you, let's do a second problem, and I'll show you where the shortcut comes into play. Let's say I have negative 2x plus 5y equals 20, and I want to know what's my x-intercept and what's my y-intercept, okay? If I want to know what x should be, I'm going to plug a 0 in for what? Y, right? So if I plug a 0 in for y, I will get my x, and that's where it hits the x-axis. If I want to know what my y-intercept is, I plug a 0 in for x, and I'll get what my y-intercept is, okay? So here's the thing. Every single time, if I plug a 0 in, it totally gets rid of that number, because negative 2 times 0 is 0. 5 times 0 is 0. Anything times 0 is 0. So we actually call this the cover-up method, which is a little hard for me to show you right now because you can't see my hand. But I'll show you like this. So here's what we say. If I cover up, it still doesn't work. If I cover up this, right, my equation that I'm solving is 5y equals 20. If I cover up this, my equation is negative 2x equals 20. You solve those two equations and you'll get your two intercepts, right? Because if you multiply by 0, it goes away. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so using the cover-up method, let me see here. What's a good way I can... let's just do this, okay? Let's say we're going to cover up this, and we get the equation 5y equals 20, okay? So one of your equations right now is 5y equals 20. Which intercept is that going to find me? The y-intercept, okay? Then if I cover up my other one, cover up this one, because when I multiply by 0, it goes away, then what's my new equation?
Is negative 2x equals 20. So then you have to
Negative
find
2x equals 20. Okay, so those are your two equations that you're going to plug in. or that you're gonna solve for. So divide by 5 on the left, and I get y equals 4. Okay, divide by -2 on the right, and I get x equals -10. So if they ask you what is your x-intercept and what is your y-intercept, your x-intercept is -10. Your y-intercept is 4. Now, could you graph that for me?
Yes.
Your x-intercept would fall, let me get a graph here. Okay, if we were going to graph this, I'm going to count by 2s because otherwise we'll run off of the page here. But if I were going to graph this, an x-intercept of -10, if I'm counting by 2s, this would be 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. So I'm going to put my point right there. Okay, counting by 2s, my y-intercept is 4. Am I going up or down for that?
Up.
Up, because it's positive. So 2, 4 would put me right here. That means the graph of this line would look like this. Okay, so you're just plotting where does it hit the y-axis, where does it hit the x-axis. Questions on that?
No.
Okay, so sometimes they're just going to say find the x-intercept or find the y-intercept. Other times they're going to say graph it. But either way, you're pretty much doing the same setup. So let's just look at this problem here. If I say graph x minus 2y equals -2. Okay, our process is find the intercepts first. So we want to figure out what's your x-intercept and what is your y-intercept. So give me the two equations that you need to solve.
X equals -2.
Right, so if I cover up the -2y, I would get x equals -2.
And then -2y equals -2.
Right. Okay, so if I cover up the x, I'm left with my blue equation there. So now you have to solve them. If x equals -2 is my equation, that's also my answer. There's nothing to solve there, right? It's just x equals -2. What do I have to do with the blue?
You have to divide
By
-2.
-2. Okay, so if I divide by -2, I get y equals what? What's -2 divided by -2?
1.
A positive 1. Okay, so when they say graph it, what do we do?
You graph it.
How do you graph it?
So you go on the x-axis, see it's -2, so you're gonna go to the left, and then you're gonna start at 0 again for the y, and then go up 1.
Right, so you always go back to 0, 0, okay? If x equals -2, I'm gonna go 2 to the left and plot that point.
You don't go up.
If y equals 1, it's a y-intercept. It's saying where does it hit the y-axis? So y equals 1 means you're going to go up 1 from 0, 0, right? So this is your y-axis, this is your x-axis. They are intercepts. Where do they hit those axes, okay? So once you have that, then you just take your straight edge and you draw your line in. Okay, so when they ask you to graph it, that's what they're asking you for. Find the intercepts and then plot those 2 points. Questions on that? Okay, so in this form, should you ever have a point that's not on your x or y axis? No, never. Okay, the 2 points you plot, one of them will fall on the vertical axis, one of them will fall on the horizontal. Okay, questions on that? Okay, last thing, not quite, there's one last thing, but it's kind of a sidebar. Here it is, example 3. It's gonna say, what is the graph of each equation? Okay, and then here are your 2 equations that we're going to do. The first one, we're going to do x equals 3. What is that graph? The second one, we're going to do y equals 3. Okay? So they look similar, right? They both have a 3, but one is x equals and one is y equals. So I'm going to give you two graphs here. Okay, and now here's what we got to figure out. What does the graph of each of these look like? So think about what it's saying. If I'm saying x equals 3, okay, this equation, think about what points have an x value of 3. So I could just pick a bunch of random points. 3, 1. Is my x value 3? Yes. Okay, so the x is always that first number. So if I did 3, 0, or 3, -1, right? All of those points have an x value of 3. So if I were to plot those, 3, 1, 3, 0, 3, -1, those 3 points are going to be on that line x equals 3. So what kind of line is x equals 3? What is this type of line called?
It's called,
It's vertical, okay? So whenever it's x equals, it will always be a vertical line. Oops. Okay? Now think about where y always equals 3. If I pick some points that have a y value of 3, like 0, 3 has a y value of 3, 1, 3 has a y value of 3, -1, 3 has a y value of 3. Y is always 3 at those 3 points. If I plot them, 0, 3, 1, 3, -1, 3, okay? What type of line is that? Horizontal. So here is a little just helpful hint for you. Whenever it's y equals, if you flip a y upside down, it kind of looks like an H for horizontal. Okay, so if it's y equals 3, it's always a horizontal line. Well, I mean, it's a stretch, right? But it looks like an H. Yes, a lowercase h. Whereas x equals is like two V's put on top of each other for vertical. So when it's x equals, it's a vertical line. Okay? What's your question, Julie?
okay, so you said you have to plug the 3 in for both of them. So like on this side is the x, on the y. I don't get why you put.
You don't have to do this part at all. This was just me showing you where x always equals 3 or where y always equals 3. If you remember that x equals is always vertical, you don't have to plot any points for me. You just have to draw the line in. But this was just me showing you that, notice, if x equals 3, my x value has to be 3. If y equals 3, my y value has to equal 3. So you can always plot points if that helps you. Like, oh, pick a point that has a y value of 3. Pick 2 points that has a y value of 3, and you'll get your line.
Oh, so if it was to say like x equals 4, find a point that has.
Then you could say any points that have 4 as their x value. So 4, 1, 4, 2, 4, 3, 4, 4. All those points have an x value of 4.
Okay, and if that was to be 4, like would I put it like right here at 4 and then just put the line?
And then vertical, yep. And you don't have to, I don't need to see the point. I need to see the line, is what I need. Okay, so let's just do a couple more of those and then we're done. Okay, let's say we have the equation y equals -2. Okay, so if my equation's y equals -2, is that going to be a vertical or a horizontal line? Horizontal. Which way does horizontal go? This way, right? If you think about looking out on the horizon, horizontal, okay? So where y equals -2, am I going up or down with my 2?
Down.
Down. It's a -2. So down 2 would put my horizontal line right here. And now think about what points you have, right? This is 0, -2, 1, -2, 2, -2, 3, -2, 4, -2, 5, -2. My y value is always -2, okay? Where would x equals -1 be? Horizontal or vertical? That's vertical. Where? This way, right? Where would it fall? Where's -1 going to bring us?
Over here and then down.
Oh, to the left.
To the left, right? So it's your x value. You're going to go left 1. So your x value is always -1 at this line. Well, you said here, but I didn't know what here meant. So left 1, x equals -1 is a vertical line at -1. Does that make sense? Okay, so as long as you can remember y equals is horizontal, x equals is vertical, those should be fairly simple, okay? And you can always pick points to plot if that helps you. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay, that is standard form.